You can find them on Twitter, you can find them on the gram. After listening to their podcast, you'll be sitting there like, damn, taking their teaching from one level to the next, reaching up to Canada and down to Mexico.
I guess we kind of covered, like, what about equity kind of sparked your interests and all. So for the audience, when we're talking about equity in education, like, what is it exactly that we're even speaking about? And I don't, whoever wants to answer or chime in, that'd be great.
You go ahead and you start this one, Reggie. You start this one.
Equity in education is making sure that, and I don't, and like Abner was saying, we don't talk about level playing fields. I think we're just talking about ensuring that all students, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, abilities, have their opportunity to create in themselves and be their best selves. We're charged with educating students for portions of society that does not exist yet, right? And so how do we do that, but making sure that each student has what they need, as opposed to making sure all students have the same thing, right? So it's that equity versus equality kind of argument. So for me, equity in education is meeting those students, establishing those relationships, and meeting those students where they are, to provide them the tools they need to be successful in college and beyond.
Yeah, and it may mean, right, Reggie? It may mean that certain schools need more support, whatever that might mean. That might mean additional funding, that might mean additional people. But to me, it's an understanding of the opportunity gaps that exist for certain students, and what needs to be done to fill those gaps, right? Whatever that might be. And I'm not sure. I mean, I'd love to hear what you two think, Joe and Ron. I'd love to hear what you two think, but I'm not sure that schools do that kind of really careful examination of what those opportunity gaps are, and then really work to create the systems that sort of push against the kind of institutional bias, institutional racism that occurs for a lot of students, that pushes against that to kind of fill those gaps, right? Reggie, does that make sense? Does that kind of hue with what you're thinking?
Absolutely. Because the term opportunity gaps is, I think, at the foundation of it all. What opportunities do you have, or are you lacking to be able to be successful? There's an assumption that, if we give, the Ron School, the Joe School, the Abner School, and the Reginald School the same amount of money, regardless of their student population, they should be successful. And there are gaps in where students are showing up at the door, one of our schools may have more students moving in from a foreign land who, so English is not their first language. How do we get them on algebra if they're struggling with English, and things like that. So the opportunity gaps in addressing those and pushing back against those is foundational in this way.
Thanks for listening to the Teacher Nerds podcast. Keep up with every new episode by subscribing on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Podcast, Anchor, or anywhere you listen. Remember to visit teachernerds.com, and that's nerds with a Z. Follow us on Twitter @TeacherNerds and on Instagram @TeacherNerdsPodcast. And thank you for being one of the Teacher Nerds.